The first knock on the door was polite, almost hesitant. The second was not. It was the authoritative rat-a-tat-tat that vibrated the cheap brass knocker I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. I knew who it was before I peered through the peephole and saw the crisp blue uniforms. My stomach, already a knot from the certified letter on my kitchen counter, tightened into a diamond. "Miss Flores?" the older officer asked, his voice muffled through the wood. I took a deep breath, smoothed my pajama pants. It was Saturday, for heaven's sake, and opened the door. "That's me." 2 officers stood there, one mid-40s with a weary, practiced calm, the other younger, trying to mirror that calm, but his eyes were darting to the bright purple clematis vine now cheerfully strangling my front porch railing. The HOA's violation notice had called it an uncontrolled botanical hazard. "We received a complaint from your Homeowners Association." The older one, Officer Greeley according to his badge, said, "regarding a public nuisance and a code violation. Something about a structure?" I almost laughed, a laugh born of 6 months of pure, distilled frustration. "The structure," I said, stepping outside and pointing, "is a bookshelf on my own property." The object in question stood proudly at the edge of my driveway. Under the generous shade of the old oak, the HOA also wanted me to trim to acceptable dimensions. It was a sturdy, hand-painted little free library I'd built with my dad, designed like a rustic cottage. It was filled with children's books, mysteries, cookbooks, and the occasional romance novel. A small laminated sign read, "Take a book, leave a book. Be kind." For 6 months, it had been a quiet, beloved little fixture. Mrs. Henderson from 3 doors down donated all her historical fiction. The Jenkins kids traded dog-eared graphic novels. Then Barbara Kensington became president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The complaint states it's an unpermitted outbuilding placed in a utility easement. Officer Greeley recited, consulting his notepad. They allege it attracts loitering and undesirable traffic. I crossed my arms. The undesirable traffic is 8-year-old Chloe, who's learning to love Matilda. The loitering is Mr. Abrams, who is 82 and likes to sit on my garden bench to choose his next Western. The younger officer, Travers, coughed. "Look," I said, the anger I'd banked for weeks finally finding a vent. "I got their violation letter. I have 30 days to remove it or face fines." I appealed at the last meeting. Barbara, President Kensington, said it was aesthetic blight on the neighborhood's curb appeal coherence. I asked if she'd ever taken a book. She said she doesn't touch publicly handled items. "So why call you now?" Officer Greeley's lips thinned. He looked from me to the charming little library, to the meticulously manicured, soulless lawn of the house next door, Barbara's house. A house that looked like a museum diorama titled Suburban Perfection, circa now. "The complainant was insistent," he said carefully. "She reported it as an ongoing trespass and theft hazard. Said she'd seen suspicious individuals gathered around it at odd hours. The suspicious individual at 7 p.m. last night was my book club." I said flatly, "We were discussing the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo." It was riveting. Barbara's motion sensor floodlight stayed on us the whole time. A flicker of something, amusement, maybe, passed behind Officer Greeley's eyes. He walked over to the library. Officer Travers followed. Greeley ran a hand over the smooth, painted wood. He bent down and opened the little door. Inside, books were neatly organized. On the top shelf sat a pristine copy of All the President's Men. "You take a lot of pride in this," he stated, not asked. "It's for the neighborhood. Our neighborhood, not the one in the HOA bylaws from 1987. He straightened up. The radio on his shoulder crackled with some distant, real crime. He looked back at Barbara's house. The living room curtain twitched and fell back into place. "Ma'am," Officer Travers piped up, official and young. "If it's on the easement, technically, the HOA might have a point about the permit. We can't really intervene in a civil dispute. You'd have to take it up with them, or in court." I felt the defeat start to sink in. This was it. Barbara would win. The library would be gone, replaced by what? Another identical boxwood shrub? But Officer Greeley held up a hand, silencing his partner. He was still looking at the library. Then he reached into his own back pocket. He pulled out a slightly worn paperback, a police procedural. He held it for a moment, considering. Then, with deliberate motion, he placed it on the middle shelf of the little free library. "My wife's been trying to get me to get rid of this one for weeks," he said, his voice low. "Says I've read enough." He turned to me, and his official mask was gone, replaced by the tired face of a man who'd seen real problems. "It's a nice thing you've got here, Miss Flores. A real nice thing." He looked directly at the window next door, his gaze lingering. "We're going to go advise the complainant that this does not constitute a criminal matter, and that," he paused, choosing his words to the official report he'd have to file, "the observed activity appears to be consistent with positive community engagement." My jaw went slack. Officer Travers looked between his superior and the library, confused. Then, slowly, he reached into his own patrol car, rummaged in his gym bag, and pulled out a slightly dog-eared fitness magazine. He walked over and placed it awkwardly on the shelf next to Greeley's book. "For community engagement," he mumbled, a blush creeping up his neck. The police cruiser hadn't even reached the end of the street before my phone began to vibrate like an angry hornet. It was Meredith from 2 streets over, who had witnessed the entire encounter from her kitchen window while baking banana bread. "Did they arrest the library?" "Tell me they didn't," she breathed, a mix of outrage and glee in her whisper. "No arrests," I said, watching the curtain next door remain ominously still. "In fact, they made a donation." Meredith's cackle was pure joy. "I'm putting the kettle on. You need to come over and tell me everything. And bring that copy of Evelyn Hugo. Susan wants to borrow it." The story, as these things do in suburbs, traveled not at the speed of sound, but at the speed of texting. By sundown, it was a legend. The HOA president had called the cops on a little free library, and the cops had liked it. They'd left books. It was a small, perfect rebellion. The next morning, Sunday, I came out to get the paper. I stopped cold. Overnight, the little free library had multiplied. Tucked beside it was a small, hand-sewn fabric bag filled with paperback thrillers. A note pinned to it read, "From the Henderson Archives. Barbara can stuff it." Leaning against the leg of the library was a brand-new, pristine copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, with a sticky note. "For expanding minds, not shrinking horizons. The Jenkins kids and Mom." But that wasn't all. On my driveway, in neat, cheerful chalk, was a sprawling mural. Someone, likely the artistic middle schooler Leo, had drawn a majestic, smiling book with police officers giving a thumbs up. Bubbly letters proclaimed, "Whispering Pines Public Library, EST. Now, fines, 0. Joy, unlimited." I was clutching my chest, utterly speechless, when Barbara Kensington stormed across her immaculate lawn. She was in her Sunday power walking gear, a look of apoplectic fury on her face. "This," she spluttered, pointing a trembling finger at the chalk art. "This is vandalism. This is a defacement of private property. And this," she swung her arm toward the now bursting library and its new offerings, "is littering. I am calling the board for an emergency session. We will pass a special assessment for pressure washing this graffiti immediately." "Good morning, Barbara," I said, my voice sweet as a honey she probably took in her imported tea. "It's washable chalk. It'll be gone with the next rain. And those are donations. From the community. You should see what the police left." Her face went from puce to a concerning shade of pale. The police part of the story clearly hadn't made it to her yet, probably because no one on our street was speaking to her unless absolutely necessary. The news hit her like a physical blow. She took a step back, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. The authorities, the very entity she'd summoned to enforce order, had endorsed the disorder. They what? "They liked it," I said simply, picking up my paper. "They thought it was a positive community engagement. Have a blessed day, Barbara." I turned and went inside, leaving her standing there, a statue of suburban defeat amidst the blooming peonies and the cheerful, illegal chalk. The week that followed was the most quietly exhilarating of my life. The little library that could became the neighborhood's beating heart. Donations poured in, not just books. People started leaving other things. seed packets for the community garden the HOA had previously vetoed, jars of homemade jam with little tags, a crocheted cozy for the library's roof to keep the books warm. Someone left a bag of lemons from their tree with a recipe for lemon bars. It was a peaceful, paper-based insurrection. And then came the Saturday, 1 week after the police visit. I was inside when I heard the distinct diesel rumble of a large vehicle. My heart dropped. Had Barbara hired someone? A demolition crew for a bookshelf? I rushed to the window. It wasn't a demolition truck. It was a fire engine. A big, red, beautiful fire engine rolling slowly down our quiet cul-de-sac. It came to a stop not at a burning building, but directly in front of my house. Captain Alvarez, a friend of a friend from the neighborhood barbecue. No HOA could stop, hopped down from a cab. He was a large man with a kind smile. He saw me gaping from the doorway and gave a wave. "We heard you had a little code inspection issue last week," he boomed, his voice carrying perfectly to every open window on the street. "Thought we'd come do our own inspection. Make sure everything's up to snuff. Fire safety, you know? Books can be flammable." Behind him, 3 other firefighters disembarked, trying and failing to hide their grins. They formed a loose, official-looking circle around the little free library. Captain Alvarez made a great show of checking behind it, peering at the roof, opening the little door. Then he turned and gave a thumbs up to his crew. One of them walked back to the engine and returned with a box. Not a Citation box. A cardboard box, heavy and full. "Inspection passed," Captain Alvarez announced loudly. "But we're going to issue a recommendation for increased community resource allocation to mitigate future incidents." He took the box and began unloading books into the already crammed library. Children's books about firefighters, thrillers, nonfiction about historic rescues. The library overflowed. They started a neat pile on the ground next to it. Neighbors were emerging now, phones held aloft, recording. Meredith was there, holding her now famous banana bread, tears in her eyes. The Jenkins kids were jumping up and down. And then Barbara's front door opened. She stood frozen in the doorway, her face a masterpiece of conflicted fury. She couldn't yell at the fire department. She couldn't cite them for an unpermitted gathering. They were civil servants, performing a safety inspection. Captain Alvarez saw her. He gave her a polite, professional nod. Then he reached into the very bottom of the box. He pulled out a single, old, slightly soot-smudged copy of Fahrenheit 451. He walked over and placed it, with deliberate reverence, right on the very top of the donation pile. The title glinted in the sun. The message was nuclear, and it was perfect. The fire engine's departure left a silence that was anything but quiet. It was a silence vibrating with the echo of diesel engines and the collective, hell breath of a neighborhood watching a paradigm shift in real time. Barbara Kensington's door shut with a soft, definitive click, a sound more final than any slam. I stood on my porch, surrounded by books and joy and the faint, sweet smell of diesel exhaust. The firefighters had posed for pictures with kids, accepted slices of Meredith's banana bread, and left with waves and blaring horns, a victory salute. My little free library was now a monument, a fortress of pages and goodwill. But I knew Barbara. This wasn't over. A woman who cited the Millers of their excessively yellow daffodils did not surrender to a pile of paperbacks, even ones blessed by the local FD. The retaliation would be bureaucratic, venomous, and by the book, her book. It arrived on Monday, not by police or fire truck, but by certified mail, a thick envelope from the law firm of Hartman, Greeley and Strauss. No relation to the officer, a coincidence that made me smirk. It was a formal notice of covenant violation and intent to levy fines. It cited 12 separate bylaws the library violated, from unapproved structure and easement encroachment to attracting vermin pigeons have been seen nearby once, and creating a public attraction causing grass wear and tear. The fines were astronomical, compounding daily until compliance was achieved. A separate, tersely worded letter from the board, signed by Barbara, informed me of an emergency hearing scheduled for Thursday night to vote on its immediate removal and associated cost assessment. This was the move I'd been waiting for. The overreach. I didn't panic. I went to my laptop and opened the folder I'd been curating for months. HOA nonsense. I hit print. Then I picked up the phone. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I called Officer Greeley. He listened patiently as I explained the new development. "I can't do anything about the fines, Miss Flores," he said, a note of genuine regret in his voice. "That's their territory. But a hearing, you say? Open to the community?" "According to bylaws, any member can attend and speak for 3 minutes on a posted agenda item." I confirmed. There was a long pause on the line. "Well," he said slowly, "as a community liaison officer, attending local meetings to foster understanding is part of my duty." And my wife asked if you got any good new mysteries in. I called Captain Alvarez. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "A hearing? Wouldn't miss it for the world. The crew's been following the saga. We'll be there. In civvies, of course. Wouldn't want to intimidate anyone." His tone suggested the opposite. Then, I did what Barbara had never done. I engaged the neighborhood, not with angry texts, but with invitations. I printed simple flyers with a picture of the library, surrounded by kids and books and chalk art. The headline, "Save Our Story Time. Hearing this Thursday, 7 p.m., Clubhouse." I slipped them into every mailbox, including Barbara's. The Whispering Pines Clubhouse had never seen a crowd like the one that gathered on Thursday. The usual attendees, Barbara and her 2 most loyal board members, Evelyn and Carol, sat behind a long table at the front, looking like a very stern panel of judges. They expected maybe a handful of noisy dissidents. They did not expect a standing room-only crowd that packed the room. Young parents with babies and slings. Retirees like Mr. Abrams, leaning on his cane. The Jenkins family, the kids holding handmade "I Heart Soup" book signs. Meredith and the book club, a formidable phalanx of women with determined smiles. Leo, the chalk artist, looking nervous but proud. And in the back, standing against the wall, were Officer Greeley in a polo shirt and khakis, and Captain Alvarez in a simple fire department T-shirt, flanked by 2 of his crew. They weren't in uniform, but their presence was a silent, massive fact in the room. Barbara opened the meeting, her voice slightly higher than usual. She went through the violations with robotic efficiency, her eyes fixed on her notes, unable to meet the gaze of the crowd. When she finished, she asked if there were any comment from the community regarding Agenda Item 7A, violation abatement at 2143 Willow Lane. I stood up. I had my 3 minutes, but I didn't use them for myself. "Thank you, Madam President." I began. "I won't speak long. I just want to introduce you to your neighbors." I turned to the crowd. "Mr. Abrams," I said. The old man straightened up. "What did you take from the library last week?" His voice, rough but clear, filled the quiet room. "Lonesome Dove. Best book I've read in 10 years. Left with Zane Grey." "Chloe Jenkins?" The little girl, emboldened by the crowd, piped up, "I got the BFG." And I left baby Mouse for someone else. One by one, I called on them. The young mom who found a much-needed parenting guide during a sleepless night. The teenager who discovered poetry. Meredith, who found friends in the book club that formed around the library. I held up the copy of Fahrenheit 451 the firefighters had left. This was donated by first responders. I said, my voice finally cracking. They think this little library is worth protecting. Not as a structure, but as an idea. My 3 minutes were long gone. No one stopped me. The board was paralyzed. Then people started standing up unprompted. "You cited me for a pink porch light for breast cancer awareness," one woman said, pointing at Barbara. "This library has done more for this community's health than you ever have." "My property value isn't hurt by a bookshelf," a man boomed. "It's hurt by knowing I live next to someone who called the cops on it." The room erupted in agreement. It was a wave of pure democratic sentiment, crashing over the flimsy table where the board sat. Barbara's face was sheet white. She banged the gavel weakly. "Order. This is not. We must follow the procedures." It was then that Officer Greeley stepped forward from the back. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The room fell silent. recognizing the calm authority from my doorstep. "Madam President," he said, his voice even, "I just want to know for the record, as a community resource officer, that the police department views community building initiatives like the Little Free Library as a net positive for neighborhood safety and cohesion. They reduce social isolation, which is a key factor in a lot of things we get called for." He let that hang in the air. "We'd hate to see anything happen that might damage that." Captain Alvarez stepped up beside him. He simply crossed his massive arms over his chest and looked at the board. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The message was clear. "We are here. We see you." The final blow came from an unexpected corner. Evelyn, Barbara's most stalwart board member, a woman who lived for the bylaws, slowly put down her pen. She looked at the furious, hopeful faces of her neighbors. She looked at the stoic first responders. She looked at Barbara's rigid, uncompromising profile. Then she pushed her chair back and stood. "Barbara," she said, her voice trembling but loud, "I moved a motion for the violation, but I was wrong." A gasp went through the room. "My grandson," he has trouble reading. "He took a book about dinosaurs from that library last weekend. He read it to me. All of it." She turned to the crowd, tears in her eyes. "I withdraw my support for the motion. I move we table this item indefinitely and form a committee to draft new guidelines for community sharing structures." It was over. The last pillar of Barbara's support had crumbled. Carol, the other board member, simply nodded, looking relieved. The vote to table was unanimous among the board. The crowd didn't cheer. They erupted. It was a celebration of sheer, shared victory. As people mingled, laughing, crying, planning the library expansion party, Barbara gathered her papers. She walked out of the clubhouse alone, her heels clicking a lonely rhythm on the tile. She didn't look at anyone. I found Officer Greeley and Captain Alvarez by the water cooler. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, my own eyes wet. Captain Alvarez clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Kid, you did all the work. You built something people wanted to protect. We just showed up to make sure the paperwork didn't win." He nodded toward the door where Barbara had exited. "Some people see a rule. Others see a community. You reminded everyone which one is more important." Officer Greeley smiled. "My wife wants to know if the book club is accepting new members. She's finished Evelyn Hugo and needs to talk about it immediately." The following Saturday dawned bright and clear, the kind of morning that seems to polish the world with hope. The library expansion party was less of a party and more of a neighborhood barn raising, with pastries instead of hay bales. The Little Free Library was no longer alone. Next to it, built from the same sturdy, painted wood, was a little free pantry, stocked by neighbors with non-perishables, toiletries, and the now legendary lemon bars. A handmade bench, cobbled together from reclaimed pallets by Mr. Abrams and Leo, sat under the oak tree, officially inviting loitering. A new HOA approved, thanks to Evelyn's new committee, plaque was being screwed onto the library. The Whispering Pines Community Hub, founded in spite, sustained by love. The street was full of people. Kids ran with chalk. Adults drank coffee and shared stories. Officer Greeley and his wife were there, browsing the now sprawling book selection. Captain Alvarez and a few firefighters were showing a group of boys the engine they'd parked politely down the street. No need to block traffic. The sense was not a victory over someone, but a collective exhale, a return to something we'd almost forgotten we could be. Barbara Kensington's house was a fortress. The blinds were drawn. The Tesla was gone from the driveway. Rumor, delivered via Meredith's impeccable network, had she left for a prolonged visit with a sister out of state. The HOA board, now led by a newly empowered Evelyn, had already announced a moratorium on all aesthetic citations and reviewed the bylaws with, as the email stated, an emphasis on community livability over rigid conformity. As I handed a plate of cookies to Mr. Abrams, he squinted up at me. "You know, she thought she was protecting her investment," he said, nodding toward Barbara's dark house. "But a house ain't an investment unless there's a home inside it. And a neighborhood ain't a price tag. It's a feeling." He was right. The feeling that morning was priceless. It was a feeling of connection, forged in the absurd crucible of a dispute over a bookshelf. We hadn't just saved the library. We'd found each other. Later, as the sun began to dip, casting long shadows from our now legal library, I noticed a lone figure walking down the sidewalk. It was a woman I'd seen but never really met from the other end of the subdivision. She looked hesitant, holding a book to her chest. She stopped in front of the library, looking at the bustling scene in my yard with uncertainty. I walked over, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Hi, I'm Elena." "I'm Sarah," she said, offering a shy smile. I heard about all this. I've been wanting to come by." She held out the book. It was a well-loved copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. I wasn't sure if... with all the trouble... "The trouble's over," I said, taking the book gently. It felt warm from her hands. "This is perfect. Thank you." She looked at the library, then at the people, her shoulders relaxing. "It's really nice," she said softly. "It feels like a real place now." As she browsed the shelves, selecting a novel, I realized that was a final, priceless reaction. Not Barbara's defeat, or the police's endorsement, or even the fire department's dramatic support. It was this: the hesitant becoming part of the whole, the stranger becoming a neighbor, drawn in by the simple, radical act of sharing a story. The library was more than a box of books. It had become a mirror. For Barbara, it reflected a world of rules and control, and she couldn't bear the sight. For the rest of us, it reflected something better, our own capacity for kindness, for rebellion, for community. We saw ourselves in it, not as property owners bound by covenants, but as people sharing what we loved. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the street was quiet again, I sat on the new bench with a cup of tea. The little library stood guard, its door slightly ajar, a light from a neighbor's porch glinting off its painted roof. A soft breeze rustled the pages of the books inside, a whisper of all the stories yet to be traded, all the connections yet to be made. I thought about the police knocking on my door, their initial sternness melting into bemused support. I thought of the fire engine's glorious, rumbling arrival. But most of all, I thought of the quiet army of neighbors who showed up with their books, their chalk, their testimony, and their hearts. The HOA had called the cops on me, hoping for enforcement. Instead, they'd summoned witnesses. Witnesses to a small act of love that grew, against all odds and bylaws, into something ungovernable and beautiful. Their reaction, from Officer Greeley's first donated paperback, to Evelyn's public change of heart, to Sarah's shy offering today, had been more than priceless. It had been a revelation. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can build in this world isn't a fence, or a perfect lawn, or a wall of rules. It's a shelf, and you fill it not with what you want to keep out, but with what you're willing to give away.